So this video is more of a book recommendation. I'm going to go into why I believe you should have a look into the book Poor Charlie's Almanack. For those of you who don't know, he's Warren Buffett's right-hand man. Warren Buffett, most famous investor ever, in charge of Berkshire Hathaway. Charlie Munger is his partner, his right-hand man, when he was just before his passing, unfortunately, a year ago or so, at the time of this recording. So in this book, it's a collection of his talks and some thoughts he has. And a lot of the things he covers, and I think the essence of some of what he covers in this book is essentially his principles and his general sort of rules that he has in his head. They're like short circuits almost. It's like a shortcut that he has in his head, these mental models, and how you can adopt them yourself and how they can sort of apply into your life, um, and sort of enhance your thinking without much effort, because essentially the brain specializes and you only have so much computing power. So instead of trying to increase the computing power of something, why not just make it run on less computing power and stronger as a result? So some of the things he mentions in the book is, I'll give you three as an example, and I think there are a few more things that are worth looking into. But number one, I think, is just the power of compounding itself. I mean, even Einstein said it was the eighth wonder of the world, essentially, where if you just grow something at 26% a year, for example, you would be able to 10x every 10 years. So that means if you 10x in 10 years, and in 20 years, you'll 100x, in 30 years, you'll 1000x. And that's very, very good in terms of an investment perspective. So if you were able to achieve such a return, hypothetically, if you put in $10,000, you'd be able to grow that to $1 million in 20 years and 10 million in 30 years, and even more so going forwards. But I mean, that's sort of what he was describing there. And it's something which people sort of underestimate, because people don't think logarithmically, meaning that people don't think in 1, 10, 100, 10,000, a million, and so forth. People think, quite linearly, like 2, 4, 6, 8, and so forth. And rightly so, that's sort of how humans were adapted and best evolved to survive, essentially. But that's sort of a mental model that he has. Another one is sort of the Lollapalooza effect, meaning that there are sometimes rare occurrences, where one factor stacks on top of another factor and another factor, and they all compounding on top of each other. They make it that much stronger. For example, the Apple wave. So with Apple, you had the growth of you had the general growth of the technology wave, you had the technological wave that's occurring, and you had the ecosystem, the Apple ecosystem, in terms of the Apple Store on top of that, meaning that Apple's revenue was already going to grow because it was in a growing market, assuming they did okay. Plus the fact that they had this ecosystem which sort of locked them in and attracted people, because it had this ecosystem where they might want one feature, but then it encourages a second feature. That's another one. Or perhaps Facebook, where it has is network effect. So the more people that use Facebook attracts even more people, because everyone's using Facebook as the default. There's stuff that you can take into account, and sort of like micro Lollapalooza effects, and being able to identify such circumstances are very beneficial. And the third one, which is one of my favorite ones, is always invert. And that's something he's picked up from a mathematician, which basically means that the brain, and it sort of comes back to adaptation as humans, the brain has been better suited at finding what are the threats, what are the risks, than looking at the positives. So if you always invert, you're able to much quicker identify and analyze certain things and spot things you perhaps wouldn't want to do. You wouldn't be able to do otherwise. For example, I think it was Monish Pabrai had been asked what can he do to help India. Monish Pabrai is a famous super investor, for those of you who don't know, and sort of has learnt from Charlie's writings. And he'd been asked what could the government do to support India with its growth. And Monish Pabrai instantly inverted that question. Well, he said, what can we do to kill India? as a country and stagnate its development. And one of the things he said was basically cut off all supplies. So if you cut off all supplies in terms of, because they import a lot of liquefied natural gas, and they import a lot of, for example, coal and other items that the business just needs for its own development, and they might not have enough internally to sort of develop with. Then he got straight to the core of the answer, where if you just thought from the positives, what can we help to encourage development, you would have likely never stumbled into that answer. I personally wouldn't have stumbled into such an answer, to think that, oh, if we actually just focus on our supplies and what's driving, what the requirements to drive growth, I think that would benefit us a lot more. You would have done much better off there, in my opinion, and sort of have a fresh perspective. It's a shorthand way to give yourself a new perspective. And I think it's really worth reading into this book and sort of developing this framework. There's a reason he's done so well in his time as well. And I've read it once, I'm going to reread it, and I feel like it's one of those which is that high quality where you reread the book. Thank you for listening. That's all for this one.